Hey guys, it's Alexis, aka The Soft Reader, and I'm here today to do a video where I'm going to talk to you about my least favorite required reading from school. So last week I uploaded a video where I discussed my favorite books that I was ever required to read during school, and so I thought it would be interesting to flip that and talk about my least favorite books I ever had to read. These, for whatever reason, I didn't enjoy. If you enjoyed them, perfectly fine, perfectly normal. I have very specific reasons I probably didn't enjoy most of these, and this list ended up being a lot longer than I expected it to. But yeah, I mean, these are all going to be classics, I think, except for one, and yeah, so we'll just go ahead and get into it. The first book I'm going to mention is actually my least favorite book I've ever been required to read in school, and that is The Grapes of Wrath by Steinbeck. I hated this book. Like, I'm talking like, I didn't even do most of the actual reading for this book because I couldn't. I would read 2 pages of it and immediately be like, I don't want to do this. I don't want to be here anymore. I don't want to do this anymore. I failed a couple of the quizzes we had on them because I literally didn't know anything about any of this stuff. The 2 main problems I had with The Grapes of Wrath, the first being that a lot of it is written in dialect, and I have a very hard time reading books that are written in dialect because I read these words that are written to sound like the dialect, but for me it's hard for me to read that, and a good portion of The Grapes of Wrath is written like that. So I was having to read these parts out loud and decode them basically because I genuinely couldn't read them and understand what the characters were saying at all. The other one is just that I didn't care. I didn't really like the story, I didn't really like the characters, and so once I got 100 pages in, I just skimmed the rest of it because I was like, I don't want to do this anymore. The next one I'm going to mention is The Scarlet Letter by Nathaniel Hawthorne. It's funny because I don't like this book at all, but I'm actually a fan of Hawthorne's short stories. In particular, The Minister's Black Veil is one of my favorite short stories. I think Hawthorne as a writer fits better with short stories because that was kind of my main problem I had with The Scarlet Letter, is that The Scarlet Letter was so much prose, and there'd be 9 pages of solid prose. Some pages were whole paragraphs, and then you'd get to 3 lines of dialogue, and then back to 5 pages of solid prose. And my brain can't handle that much solid block of text. I just totally check out and lose interest. The story of The Scarlet Letter is actually really interesting. With Hester Prynne fosters a child, but she's unwed, and so this village makes her wear a scarlet A for adulterer on her chest, and meanwhile the father of her child is kind of dealing with the guilt of watching Hester suffer when he is not suffering in the slightest. So the story's really good, and I've liked the movie adaptation that we watched, but I'm just not a fan of the book and of Hawthorne's novel writing style. The next one I'm going to mention is one I actually read in the 7th or 8th grade. So it's been a very long time, but I really, really disliked it when I read it back then. And that is Hatchet by Gary Paulson. I actually know that this is a very well-loved story. I'd like to read it now and see if I dislike it as much as I disliked it the first time I read it, but middle school me did not like that book at all. I found myself so bored, and I didn't care. And I was like, this kid could die, and I genuinely wouldn't care at all. Which is not a good feeling to have in a book where you have one character surviving in the wilderness after a plane crash. But I just genuinely just didn't like that book at all. I'm not sure if nature survival stories are even my thing, but I would be interested in giving Hatchet another shot. It's probably the only book on this list I would give another shot to, but when I was required to read it, I hated it. The next one I'm going to mention is The Importance of Being Earnest by Oscar Wilde. I have read 2 Oscar Wilde works, this one and The Picture of Dorian Gray, and I have liked neither. So I think Oscar Wilde just isn't for me. The main problem I had with The Importance of Being Earnest is that it's a satire, it's a satirical play, and I just think satire is is so much more effective visually. You know, watching a play performed on stage, a satirical play performed on stage, and hearing the actors deliver the lines is so much more effective than me reading it. I find that when I read a satirical play, some of it goes over my head. It's just that satire is dry and sarcastic, and so a lot of times it doesn't come across well when you're reading a play in like a reading format rather than seeing it on stage. Also, there's a whole bunch of parts in The Importance of Being Earnest where there are two characters who are both earnest and they're having a conversation and you're just like, what is going on? So yes, I think I wouldn't hate the play seeing it, but I did not enjoy reading it. The next one I'm going to mention is another one that I like the story of, I don't like the execution, and that is A Tale of Two Cities by Charles Dickens. This is one of only 2 Charles Dickens books I have read. It was this and A Christmas Carol. This one I read for school when I was in 10th grade, and I'm not a fan of Charles Dickens' writing. Charles Dickens, you can tell that he was paid by the word because so much of the content is completely unnecessary. So much of the descriptions of stuff is unnecessary. It's superfluous information that you don't need. And so reading it, you're like, I literally don't care what the cobblestone looks like. I don't care about anything. I just want to see some people get guillotined. And that was my entire feeling the entire time I was reading A Tale of Two Cities. Now, A Tale of Two Cities, I actually really love the story. I love the ending. I hated reading it. I've never actually seen a movie adaptation of A Tale of Two Cities, but I'm sure if I did, I'd love it. I just didn't like reading the book because Charles Dickens is so wordy, and you just want to be like, dude, take it down a notch. You don't need 30 words to say something you can say in 15. The next one I'm going to mention is one I have had the misfortune of having to read twice, once in high school and once in university, and that is The Metamorphosis by Franz Kafka. Kafka as a person is really interesting to me, but I just did not, I didn't like it either time I've read it. I didn't like it in high school, and then having to read it a second time, and having to be told the same information about the novella was excruciating. I just don't like the Metamorphosis. I just don't get I understand it, but I just don't get the point of why it exists, if that makes sense. Like, every time I'm reading it, I'm just like, why? Why is this a thing? I just feel like that could have been executed in a way more interesting way than it was, and I don't know, I just don't care that this man got turned into a cockroach and that he's now forced to live as a giant bug. I don't care. I hated it. Both times I had to read it. The last one on this list is it's kind of a memoir, but it's not, well, I guess you could call it a memoir. I think it was actually one of the first memoirs ever written, possibly. And I'm blanking on the full title, but I remember it as Confessions by Jean-Jacques Rousseau. I read this one when I was in university in the one English class I took. This is basically Jean-Jacques Rousseau's memoir of all of the things he feels he had to confess to, and I believe in part it was, the whole point is that he's saying that, like, he's not perfect and that he's going to, like, lay bare all of his confessions, and that he dares any man to say that he didn't have a full length of stuff he could talk about. Now, the main reason I didn't like this is because, like, 2 pages into it, Jean-Jacques Rousseau admits to some of his, like, sexual fantasies that he had. This was something he, like, genuinely published in the newspaper at the time, too, which is astounding. But he talks about, like, being spanked by his, like, mistress when he was younger and, like, enjoying it, and I immediately was just like, no, nope, not interested. Can we read something else, please? Because I don't want this in my head. And so, yeah, like, just, I remember just reading that and, like, texting my friend Hannah, who I took that class with, and just being like, no. No. No, no. Especially because the image I pull to mind of Jean-Jacques Rousseau is like him when he was like an elderly man with like a long beard. I'm just, no, no. Nope. Alright guys, so you should let me know down below what was your least favorite book that you were ever required to read in school. I'd love to hear it, or if any of these were your least favorite, we can gush about how much we disliked them. And I'll see you guys soon with another video. Bye!